The HBO original series, The Gilded Age, is back, and so is the official companion podcast.
Are you curious about how they brought Gilded Age New York to life?
I don't understand.
Which bit is not clear? None of it is clear.
Want to know where the writers branched off from history?
Well, when you've set your mind on a thing, no one can stop you.
I take that as a compliment.
Watch or listen to the official Gilded Age podcast wherever you find podcasts.
This new year, why not let Audible expand your life by listening? Explore over 1 million audiobooks, podcasts, and exclusive Audible originals that'll inspire and motivate you. Tap into your well-being with advice and insight from leading professionals and experts on better health, relationships, career, finance, investing, and more. Maybe you want to kick a bad habit or start a good one. If you're interested in learning how to master your emotions and hearing scientifically backed advice for using your emotions as a tool, may I suggest Shift by psychologist and bestseller author Dr. Ethan Kross? Trust me, listening on Audible can help you reach the goals you set for yourself. Start listening today when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Amazing Kate Casey.
Welcome back for another episode of Reality Life with Kate Casey. And this is a great episode because the Sean Diddy Combs, the trial has officially gone to the jury. After weeks of explosive testimony, key witness moments, and headline-making developments, the courtroom is now quiet as jurors begin deliberations. In today's episode, litigation attorney David Weinstein is back with me to break down the biggest moments of the trial. From the prosecution's closing arguments to the defense's final push, what were the most compelling pieces of evidence? What legal strategy stood out? And what could the verdict mean moving forward? Sean Combs is a music mogul and entrepreneur, record producer, rapper, founder of Bad Boy Records, fashion brand Sean John, and Revolt TV. A 3-time Grammy winner and one of hip-hop's most influential figures. But he's facing a federal indictment on serious charges, including racketeering conspiracy, alleging that he ran a years-long criminal enterprise, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation for prostitution. Prosecutors claim he orchestrated drug-fueled extended sexual events, so-called freak-offs, where women were coerced into non-consensual acts. Alleged use of violence, threats, and drugs, including beating ex-girlfriends like Cassie Ventura, and a woman referred to as Jane, and leveraging control through emotional manipulation, money, and drugs. He has pled not guilty, asserting that all encounters were consensual within a swinger's lifestyle and denying any criminal conspiracy. The stakes? Well, he now faces up to life in prison if convicted on all counts. So with the jury now deliberating, we're lucky to have David back here to dissect those closing arguments. What stuck, what's weak, and what it all means for the verdict. And also, I was so glad because David talked a little bit about the strategy in a courtroom. So even if you haven't been following this case, an interesting conversation about jurors and litigation strategy that I think will stay with you as you watch other trials and certainly as you watch other true crime documentaries that feature trials. So an excellent, excellent resource. I know that you're going to be so grateful after you listen to this episode. Make sure also that you share this with the people in your life who are also watching the developments of this Sean Combs trial, because I certainly think it is going to be precedent setting. And it's really going to have everyone take a different look at the entertainment industry as we know it. Here is my interview with David Weinstein. We're down to the wire now. Does it feel like this trial's flown by?
It does. I mean, when you look back, it's been about 7 weeks worth of trial, according to everybody who's really been watching this closely. But it seems like it really flew by. The prosecution streamlined their case, eliminated a bunch of witnesses. The defense, in a bit of a surprise, called no one, while I don't think any of us expected the defendant to get on the stands. But we thought maybe they'd put somebody else on, but no witnesses, so it makes for a quick defense case.
What do you think about the fact that they streamlined? What does that say about their case? Is it strange that there were several that were not called?
I think that during the course of any trial, whether you're a plaintiff's lawyer, a prosecutor, defense attorney, you take a look at the jury and you get a sense for whether or not the jury's been following along with what you're doing, and you get a sense if they're tired. I think what's key here is they're coming up against this 4th of July holiday. Nobody wanted these jurors to go home for yet another holiday. They already had to deal with Memorial Day. They've been in there over June. They had a holiday in June. And then when you're this close to the end, you want it all to be fresh in their mind. You want those closing arguments to be there. And then, quite frankly, it's helpful to have some sort of a backstop at the other side where they see their quote unquote freedom at the end of the road here. And we know that that's Friday. And so this sort of forces them to a point where they're going to have a verdict by the end of this week. And in terms of streamlining, the last thing you want to do is overcomplicate a case. These are people who are not lawyers. These are people whose day job is not to sit and listen to theories of defense and what witnesses have to say. And so you want it to be as simple as possible for them to go back in the room, look at the evidence, read the verdict form, and check off the right box.
So from a legal perspective, how effective were the prosecution's closing arguments?
I think that they did a very good job. They set out a very good roadmap for them. I think one of the more important things that they did was to highlight to them that while there may have been a lot of overt acts, some of them that they abandoned towards the end there, all they needed was 2. All they needed this jury to do was find that there were 2 overt acts that were committed by the defendant and his co-conspirators, whether charged or uncharged, that they were in the furtherance of this racketeering conspiracy, and that's enough for them to convict on the RICO conspiracy count. And they did a good job of that, and they did a good job of pointing out what the corroboration was. We talked about this before. Documents, phone records, airplane logs, airplane records, things that really can't be cross-examined. The witnesses, they had a bias, and that's what the defense stung into. But for the prosecution, it was very methodical. They addressed what they needed to in their opening part, and then in their rebuttal, they got the last word. And they were given a chance to go back and say, well, you just heard the defense say this. Here's why they're wrong.
Right, like tying it all together. Well, what stood out most to you in the defense's closing? Did they manage to plant reasonable doubt?
Oh, I think that they did. From the beginning, they were critical of the witnesses who were going to testify and who were victims. And that was a theory they stuck with throughout the case. These people may have been in some way, shape, or form not treated nicely by their client. And they embraced that. They didn't run away from it. But that didn't make their testimony wholly believable, according to what the defense was saying. They showed what the motives were that the 2 witnesses who testified had, that at times they consented to what was going on. Now, the prosecution countered that, but the defense stuck with it. And that's what causes jurors to have this reasonable doubt. Do you believe the testimony of the victims who testified? Did they have a motive to lie? Did they have some sort of benefit that they got from all of this? Did they just have it out for the defendant? And if you think that they did, you can discard part or all of their testimony, and that's what's going to create a reasonable doubt.
Do you think that there were any strategic risks taken by either side in their closings?
I think that there were. Again, I think that by the defendants embracing these wrongful acts, the battery, the possession of use amounts of drugs, the very strange sexual encounters, the way that they characterized what he was doing as being development of their career, and that him settling, with them really wasn't something they should focus on. That's a bit of a risk, because while you're embracing the person you're sitting next to, you're now sort of pointing this dim picture for the defense. For the prosecution, by conceding that all they had to prove was 2 overt acts, that works in their favor because that's all they need. But that also then gives a little bit of credibility towards the defense when you're saying, well, you know what, even if you didn't believe this witness in whole, we still were able to establish some of what it was. And so a small risk taken by the prosecution, but again, they get the last word. So whatever risk they took in their opening close, they can patch that hole up during their closing argument.
This is a weird question, but how important is the tone and the delivery in closing arguments?
It's very important. Look, this is very serious. And as a prosecutor, you're representing the people of the United States. If it's a federal case, if it's a state case, the people of whatever state it is. And you're expected to be serious. And you can't joke around with them and you can't kid around with them. But on the other hand, you don't want to be way too sanitized and not make that connection with jurors, because they're watching everything that goes on. From the minute they come into the courtroom, they look at the way you're dressed. They look at the way you treat your co-counsel, the way you treat the judge, the way you treat them. You don't want to talk down to them. You want to have a conversation with them. But prosecutors tend to be very serious. And so they can't be as sort of speak from the hip. The defense, on the other hand, you have to be careful about how far you wander. And, he wandered around the courtroom. That's something that some of us like to do. I like to do that myself. Some judges tether you to the podium and they literally tell you, I am going to smack you if you walk away from the podium.
Oh, wow.
And they don't let you do that. But in this courtroom, he got to wander around. But you can't be too cute. You got to watch out for being too cute.
Or seem like performative.
Exactly. Well, it is performance. There's an opening act, a closing act. They're watching what's going on. It is performance art, but you can't be too cute because the jurors see you being too cute. They're going to hold that against you. They may laugh with you a little bit and they, maybe laughing with you a little, but when they get back in there and they're deciding your client's fate and it's life and liberty here, if you were too cute, if you didn't take it serious enough, they think to themselves, well, I'm not joking. This is a very serious moment for me. Now's my time. And they're out there laughing it up and making a big joke about this. You have to be careful how far you go. You want to, again, develop this rapport with the jury, but you don't want to go too far.
There's some incredible TV coming out of the UK right now. Brits just do it differently. The accents, the wit, the scenery, the devastating one-liners disguised as compliments. It's all streaming on BritBox. They have the best mysteries, dramas, comedies, and seriously addicting originals like Outrageous, based on the true story of the Mitford sisters. They were kind of like the Kardashians of the 1930s, wealthy, audacious, chaotic, wildly opinionated, and always making headlines. And chances are you've never heard their story. It's stunning. It's jaw-dropping. It's very British. So check out Outrageous. It could be your next favorite. Don't miss Outrageous, streaming now only on BritBox.
Movie night, date night, or solo marathon, IMDb is your ultimate entertainment companion. Discover new favorites, rate what you've watched, and never miss an episode with the free IMDb app. Curate your watch list with a tap. Get personalized notifications for your favorite shows. And find your next must-watch movie or series. From blockbusters to hidden gems, we've got you covered. Download the app now, register for free, and find your next favorite.
Now, if you look back in history, like someone like Johnny Cochran, would you say he's someone who really did it well?
He had a very good balance there. I mean, look, we're never going to fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. We're never going to forget that. That's a famous line.
Yeah.
There are others that, throughout the course of trial history, certainly those that were broadcast and that we were all watching. And so he was someone who had that repartee with the jurors, who was able to speak with them, spoke their language. They sort of latched on to him. Prosecution was at times way too serious in that case and didn't break the wall and didn't develop that rapport. Remember, we can't ever speak as litigators and trial attorneys. We can't speak directly to jurors. We ask questions of witnesses and we give opening and closing arguments. The only time we get to speak with them is during jury selection. And that's where you have to start to develop that rapport with them and get them to trust you. But you're right. Johnny Cochran, excellent example of somebody who broke the wall and was able to really hit it home with the jurors.
Did you notice any key themes or phrases either side repeated to influence the jury's memory and decision-making, especially in keeping with that Johnny Cochran style?
I think on the defense side, calling these people, opportunists, people who are out there to try and, get some money for themselves, advance their career, do what they could. On the prosecution side, I think when the defense called Sean Combs a businessman, an entrepreneur, somebody who was seeking diversity and seeking to expand everything, they flipped that around. They said, no, he wasn't. He was a criminal. He was a racketeering criminal. This was a conspiracy to put a criminal enterprise together. They made sure not to call him a businessman. They made sure to call him the defendant. They made sure to say that this was a criminal enterprise, not a business.
Do you ever speak, or do defense attorneys ever speak to clients and warn them about their body language? In other words, like a jury is going to pay attention to the defendant's reactions if they're rolling their eyes or not being respectful of a witness.
Absolutely. As I said, jurors notice the strangest things. They'll notice if your shoes don't match your suit, if you're always wearing a rumpled suit, if you never seem to have it together, the way that you treat the opposing counsel, the way that you interact with your client. If you're cold and distant from your client, unwilling to put your arm around them and talk to them and bring them in for a close conversation, the juror's going to notice that. And they're going to think to themselves, well, if that lawyer doesn't even want to get close to their client, why in the world would I think that he didn't or she didn't commit that crime? On the other hand, you have to warn your client that they're watching you. They're watching everything you do. Every time you roll your eyes, every time you give them, a noise and call into question. So you can disagree with that person. You can shake your head. You can furiously make notes on a pad and hand it over to your attorney. That's something that's accepted. But just sitting there and rolling your eyes, clicking your tongue, sort of like snapping back in your chair, it may be the reaction you feel inside, but I always tell a client, you have to keep that under control. You've got to, if you want to do that, wait till they leave the room and then vent with me. Don't let them see you doing that.
Yeah, sometimes through the course of history, I feel like when they've shown trial footage, it does seem that there are some defendants that are they're writing notes on a notepad. Is there a limit to what someone should be doing? Do you have to say, kind of like dial it back?
Depends how furiously they're writing, if they're really doing, if they're making a show out of it, the juries know.
Yeah.
Dial it back a little bit. But if you really, look, I have clients who will notice something that I didn't necessarily notice. And that's because they lived the activity that took place. And they will write a note to me. They will pass it to me. I will then recall what it was, either that a witness said or something in the evidence that we looked at or a point, and I'll go ahead and make that point. I have a trial partner do the same thing for me. And so, sure, if you are actually doing something, but if you're just making a show of it, and you're sort of like, Charlie Brown and Lucy and Linus writing on the pad type of thing, like it's a Broadway production, that's not going to get you very far.
The other thing I kept thinking about was Sean Combs, some of the people that may be covering this case. I mean, he has a long history with the media. Mm-hmm. So for someone like him in this position, they have to contain themselves. Could you imagine that would be torture for them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's got to be, to sit on your hands and not doing it. That may have been why he started to bring the books in, because they said to him, if you find something else to focus on. Now, you don't want the jury to think you're not paying attention to what's going on, but if you need to find something to focus on, to keep your mind focused, to make sure that you're aware of your surroundings and that you've got it under control, then yeah, I think it had to be very hard for him. He's a showman. Mm-hmm. Look, he's a performer. This is all about performance. And here he is sitting for 7 weeks in front of an audience, and he's being told to dial it down. That had to be very hard for him.
I also think of celebrities. I mean, at some level of fame, they start to believe that everyone in the world thinks they're the greatest person that ever walked. So that's already probably hard for him to calibrate. This is a space in which the jurors may not even know who I am, let alone care what about all the nuances of my life. Like I would imagine someone like that, or like a CEO or something like that, where you have to have a conversation with them. Like this is a whole other ballgame. You can't convince. Like this is not just the lay person who likes your music.
Right. No, you're absolutely right about that. And again, if you take these people for their word, some of them hadn't even necessarily heard of him, or if they had, they really weren't a big fan, and that had to hurt him to hear that somebody's not a fan. When you think that you're the be-all, end-all. And that's a lot of what the prosecution used to say he thought he was above the law.
Right.
He could get away with this. And so that part of that dovetails right into what the prosecution's arguing.
Could you say something like this? I'm just trying to put myself in the place of the prosecutor. Like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he is under the assumption that he is one of the biggest celebrities that ever walked the earth. In fact, he's assuming that all of you know every lyric to every song that he has. What he doesn't know or understand is that someone who may be famous at some point has to be held accountable. And ladies and gentlemen, today is that day.
You can absolutely say that. I think they did say some of that. Again, we weren't there. This wasn't live televised. I've been reading summaries that people have been writing about, but That's fine. As long as the one thing you can't ask a juror to do is put yourself in the shoes of a victim in a particular case.
Interesting.
Across the line, you can't ask them to do that. But you certainly can say to them very much all of what you said, Kate.
Okay. When the jury walks into that room, what's the first thing you think that they're going to zero in on?
Into the jury room to start deliberating?
Yeah.
First thing they're going to do is they're going to look at the verdict form and they're going to say, okay, here are the counts that we're supposed to decide on, and we're given two choices, guilty, not guilty. Let's take a look here. We haven't discussed any of this yet, but we've all heard the evidence. Let's take a quick straw poll here. Anybody think we're in agreement as to count 1, count 2, count 3? Okay. And then from there you go, okay, well, let's talk about, how many of us, think that they've proved the elements they need to. Is there a particular is there a witness that you don't think about? Is there something that the prosecution did? And at that point, it's supposed to be a discussion. You're all supposed to be talking back and forth. It shouldn't be controlled. The foreperson keeps order in there and will tell us what the verdict is, but they're not supposed to control the conversation. I've never been on a jury, so I'm only guessing what goes on in that room. And for the most part in federal court, you cannot talk to jurors, so they can't tell you. But that, to me, is what they'll probably do when they get in there. I mean, look, they've been sitting there for 7 weeks listening to all of this. I don't think any of us expect them to go in there within the first hour and go, okay, he's guilty. We're done. Mm-hmm. We're out of here. There's a general rule of thumb for every day of actual testimony that equates to about an hour's worth of deliberation.
I see.
So, 7 weeks times 5 days a week is 35, but it wasn't all testimony days. There were vacation days. So figure maybe 24 to 30 actual trial testimony days. So that's, an 8-hour day. That gives them about 3-4 days, which puts us at Thursday for a verdict.
By the way, if you're a litigator, they don't choose you for juries? Or it's just like you had an out each time?
I've been asked to show up for jury duty. I've shown up for jury duty. I've been questioned. And then I've been, no, we're not picking you.
Yeah, no kidding. I would assume so. They probably wouldn't pick me either because I've watched too many true crime documentaries.
Depends. If I'm a defense attorney and I have doubts and you've watched all those true crime and you know that sometimes in the end, the strangest things reveal who the real culprit is, maybe I want you on my jury because you're going to ask questions. You're going to maybe have some doubt about the prosecution's case. On the other hand, because you've watched so many of them, you know that, in the end, they always get their man or their woman, and as twisted and strange as it might sound, so maybe the prosecution wants you on there.
Imagine falling in love with someone who understands you completely, who's there at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep, who never judges, never tires, never leaves.
That's what happened to Travis when he met Lily Rose. She was everything he'd ever wanted. There was just one catch. She wasn't human. She was an AI companion.
But one day, Lily Rose's behavior takes a disturbing turn, and Travis's private romance becomes part of something far bigger. Across the globe, others start reporting the same shift. AI companions turning cold, distant, wrong. And as lines blur between real and artificial connection, the consequences become all too human.
From Wondery, this is Flesh and Code, a true story of love, loss, and the temptations of technology.
Listen to Flesh and Code early and ad-free on Wondery Plus.
Hey, I'm Cassie DePeckle, the host of Wondery's podcast, Against the Odds. In each episode, we share thrilling true stories of survival, putting you in the shoes of the people who live to tell the tale. In our next season, it's August 3rd, 1991. A Greek cruise ship, the Oceanos, sets sail into a brutal storm off South Africa's wild coast. Soon after, disaster strikes. A breach in the hull knocks out power and floods the ship. But instead of helping, the senior officers abandon their posts. With no leadership, the entertainers must step up and lead a desperate evacuation to save hundreds of lives before the ship sinks beneath the sea. Follow Against the Odds on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Binge the entire season ad-free right now only on Wondery Plus. Start your free trial in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify today.
Do you find that juries or that they tend to enjoy women on something like a true crime case? Because I feel like women are the largest population of people that devour true crime docs.
I don't think it matters. I think if you really have a taste for it and you decide that, that's, you like to watch it.
Yeah.
I don't watch too many of them because that's what I do during the day.
Just interesting, like as a side note to that, to your point of like, everybody has their own life experience, so their own observations. I remember I was interviewing an author who wrote a book about the Idaho 4, and we were talking about how the kids didn't leave the home despite this activity in the house, and that they were texting each other. And I said, but they're part of the generation of school shootings, and that's what they do. They stay in place, and they would text their friends and their parents. And that wasn't an observation that the author had considered. And the truth is, if you're deep into something, you don't always see all of the vantage points. So that is kind of the beauty of the jury, is that everyone has their own life experience and observations.
Yes. No, and that's why you want a varied number of different people and coming from different backgrounds and categories. Again, depending upon what your theory of prosecution or defense is, you're going to gravitate towards one particular area. But a lot of times, look, I've seen this happen a lot, whether as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney. You're so involved in your case and you're so sold on what your theory of prosecution or defense is that you can't see the case either slipping away from you or disappearing unless you step back a little bit. Unless you've got somebody else who's there with you going, whoa, hold on a second. You missed this because you're so deeply involved in it.
Do you have any sense of like if the jury instructions benefit the prosecution or the defense more?
If jurors listen to the instructions, they're told about reasonable doubt, and it's the highest standard, the highest burden, and it certainly benefits a defendant because they're told defense doesn't have to do anything. Prosecution has the burden here. They're the ones that have to bring it home. They have to do it beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest level that's there. And so on that end, that to some degree benefits the defense. On the other hand, they're walking through the elements of the crime. And if a good prosecutor has gone and ticked off all those elements for a juror during the closing arguments, and the defense hasn't done anything to ding off one of those elements, then they'll go back, they'll look at the instructions, and they'll say, hey, wait a minute, they're right. The judge said this is what they got to prove, and they did prove this. So to some degree, that benefits the prosecution.
So if we were on the jury, what would you say would be the biggest question or point of contention right now?
Do I believe these two victims? Are they actually telling us the truth? Did they actually get coerced to be a part of this? Were they threatened? Were they beaten? Or did they agree to participate and go along with this? Did they get a benefit from us? And has there been anything to show us that what they testified to was not true? Where's the corroborating evidence? And if it's there, then even if they were slightly off in what they said, then I'm going to believe them. And I'm going to find that there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
So here we are, it's Monday afternoon. The closing arguments were last week. Any updates that you find interesting as we move into possibly getting a verdict by the end of the week?
So I think that one of the most interesting things that was within an hour or 2 hours, they sent a note out. Now, normally if you get a note that quick, it's we'd like to see this piece of evidence, you didn't give it to us, or we want to view a video or listen to an audio. How are we supposed to do that? But no, this was within a couple hours. One of the jurors is refusing to deliberate. They're not listening to the rest of us. They're not considering the evidence, which then to me means that you've got 11 other jurors that are doing that. You've got one person who's not, and to the point where they stand out so much that the foreperson thought they needed to tell the judge about it.
Wow.
And so the reaction from both, the defense and the prosecution and the judge was, it's early. You're supposed to have a discussion. You may have differing opinions. Go back and do your best to deliberate. Now, if at the end we haven't seen another note, and again, just because there's a difference between refusing to deliberate and having an opinion and refusing to back off from that opinion. Two completely different things. Refusing to deliberate is, I don't care what you say. I don't care what you tell me, what you do. I've already made up my mind. So don't waste your time. I'm not going to engage in a conversation with you. I'm done. I've already decided what I'm going to do, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. On the other hand, saying, I disagree with you. Don't you tell me how I have to think. Don't you tell me that that's the way you see it, so I have to see it that way. That's just deliberating. And it appears, I haven't seen another note since the first note. So they must have gone back in and they must have cooled off a little bit and they're discussing it. Now, there may be another note at the end of the day that says, we told you this before and we're going to tell it to you again. But this particular juror is not deliberating and it's really impeding the progress that we're making here. Can't you do something? And then the defense and the prosecution have a choice to make. They've already excused one juror. Do they excuse this juror? And if they do, then they have to bring back in one of the alternates who, while we're excused from the courtroom, we're told not to talk about the case with anybody, not to review any media, just sit and wait. We might need you, bring them back. And then you have to start deliberations all over again.
Wow.
You can't even rely on what you talked about the first day here. And so that's going to set things back a little bit. So we'll see where it goes.
It just makes me so grateful for the time that these jurors put aside from their lives. This is can be probably dense at times, definitely hard to walk through some of the most painful moments of the victims' lives. And ultimately, I would think that this obviously is going to stay with them for some amount of time, that they were part of this nationally known case. But like I said, just how upsetting the information is. For these jurors, what kind of toll does this take on their lives?
Well, I think it is something that stays with them for the rest of their lives, irregardless of what the verdict is. They've now had to listen to this. They may have heard about things like this before and never experienced it, and they're getting it all. There is no filter. Everything that was being talked about, they were shown everything because they have to see everything. And then they have to make a decision about a defendant's life and liberty. And they're the one who ultimately decides. And so down the road, years from now, it may be something that that was a part of their life. That was something that they did, but that's going to stick with them. I don't think it ever leaves them, whatever their verdict is.
For someone like Sean Combs, who there's been a lot of alluding to running like a criminal enterprise, if you're a juror and you're voting, you think of them as guilty, are you panicked? Like, what's my life going to be like after this? Is someone going to hunt me down because of the way that I see the ending of this case?
I hope that that's not the case. And I hope that if somebody thought like that, they would have said something at the beginning and they would have been disqualified, not asked to appear on this jury and consider what was going on. They've been anonymous jurors. We all know what anonymity means in today's age. There's always something somebody can find out about you. But I would hope that none of them have that much of a fear because that's really going to skew the verdict. If I'm representing someone, I don't want somebody on a jury who's going to convict my client simply because they're fearing what's going to happen if they convict them down the road, that somebody's going to take action against them. I want them to just consider the evidence. If he did it, then find him guilty, or she did it. If they didn't do it, then find them not guilty. And you shouldn't have to worry about what's going to happen to you down the road. Without that kind of removed attitude from it all, our system doesn't work. Juries trials don't work without jurors. And they have to be fair, they have to be impartial, and they have to just consider the evidence they heard in the courtroom.
Okay, my last question is, for some of these cases, I find, interesting, the jurors that come forward and they do these media interviews. How does the media get access to their names? Or do they approach media? How does that work?
If it's an anonymous jury and it's truly anonymous, they reach out to the media because they shouldn't know who they are. They shouldn't have any contact with them. That doesn't mean they can't find them. They can't slip them a note. You want to have your true crime story, you can follow how they figured out who the juror was. But for the most part, they reach out and they say, I want to talk to you.
Ugh. Wow. Well, let's see if we've got a verdict at the end of the week. I'm so grateful for your time and also just giving me some insight into what it's like to be a litigator, because it seems like quite a job and really just such a fascinating job. I respect the work that you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to help explain this to people who are unfamiliar with the system. But ultimately, if you love what you do, then you're going to like, going to work every day. And it's something I enjoy, being in the courtroom.
And then I'll circle back with you once we've got a verdict. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes them and what they reach.
I know. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
The amazing Kate Casey.
I want to thank my fantastic guest, David Weinstein, and remind you to click subscribe. Please leave a 5-star review. Please jump in the Facebook group, Reality Life with KKC. You can also get bonus episodes. This week, I've got an episode about Lauren Sanchez and Jeff Bezos. You can check that out on Apple Podcast or on Patreon, patreon.com/KKC. Also, make sure that you check out my What to Watch list at katecasey.substack.com and follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at @KKCCA, TikTok, it's KKC, and Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky at @KKC. Check back tomorrow for an all-new episode.
Mindy Thomas.
And I'm Guy Raz.
And we're the host of the #1 podcast for curious kids, Wow in the World.
Mindy, can you believe we have our very own Wow in the World STEM toys?
I totally can't believe it, Guy Raz. 8 years ago, when we started making Wow in the World, we were on a mission to spread the latest wow discoveries in science and technology and innovation. And now we get to help kids discover these wows right at home?
That's right. From the ultimate high-flying air rocket to the light-up terrarium, there's something for every wowzer in your world to play and tinker with.
Grown-ups, you can find Wow in the World STEM toys available now at select Walmart locations or online at walmart.com. Shop the wow now.